Due to the ever-expanding scope of video games, it is normal for players to be presented with enormous worlds to explore, and it makes sense that we'd get a little bit curious while in them. However, developers are tricky beings and often have an unwelcome surprise in store for us. With that in mind then, I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video games that punish you for being curious. Number 10, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, hiding the game's hardest boss in the first level. 2 words for you all out there, Ogdo Bogdo. This bloated croco frog monstrosity can be encountered pretty early on in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, on the lavatory herb hybrid planet of Bogano. What players might not be aware of at this point in the game though is that you can actually leave planets and return to them later on when you're much stronger, so you don't need to defeat every boss that you find on your travels. And yet there's something so initially unassuming about Ogdo Bogdo that you just can't resist fighting him. I mean, after all, the lad's in a little cave that you can drop down into right near the start of the level, and the fight starts with zero fanfare. So you might be excused for thinking that it's just going to be a beefier regular enemy, and dive in with your big old laser sword to chop yourself off a slimy cutlet. Only Ogdo Bogdo will make you one with the Force faster than you can say Order 66. Curious players will inevitably be exploring the planet thoroughly and will have had no real challenge up until this point. So Big Oggy will come out of nowhere and hit you like a proton torpedo in your exhaust port. Smart players will then run to live another day, whilst defiant masochists, myself included, will just repeatedly fight Ogdo until they run out of swear words. Number 9, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, do not ring this bell. I suppose you should really expect a From Software game to never go easy on you. But when you encounter a mysterious bell in Sekiro, which reads, "Do not ring this bell, inviting misfortune is an act of virtue, but only the stoutest of hearts may consider it," curiosity levels saturate to the point where even a FromSoft noob just can't resist to ring it. I mean, after all, if you see a big old bell out in the wild that says, "Do not ring it at all costs," wait, you're gonna ring it, aren't you? Of course though, in this game, doing so immediately curses you. Like Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice wasn't tough enough already, now enemies have damage resistance, increased posture resistance, and a bunch of additional buffs to make your katana about as lethal as a kitchen roll tube. In exchange, you get increased loot, sure, but that doesn't mean a thing if you only just barely beat that first troll dude on regular difficulty. In a further act of ignorant self-flagellation as well, if players refuse Kuro's gift at the beginning of the game, you'll make the title even harder. So yeah, next time you get a warning to not ring a big old demon bell, don't. Number 8, Monster Hunter World, high-level creatures roam near your target. As the saying goes, looks can be deceiving, and in Monster Hunter World, that goes double. As on your way to finding an elusive target beast, you might glimpse the sight of a different creature in the distance, one that doesn't look too tough. But the thing is, World has this tendency of occasionally letting absolute powerhouses just strut about the place, often temptingly close to your target monster, and you might think, hey, maybe I can get a twofer here and double my haul. Often, though, something far smaller can be just as potent as something much more evidently beefy, so getting dragged into a fight with what looks like easy prey can often be catastrophic. So yeah, word of advice, don't be tempted to pick a fight with something that isn't on your list. Number 7, Spelunky, the game kills you for playing too well. For a game with such a cheery aesthetic, Spelunky is anything but amicable with players. As a procedurally generated roguelike, it is expected that players will fail, but that's not to say that everyone will be prepared by the utter stress of the whole experience, as Spelunky is littered with snakes, spikes, spiders, and probably other things beginning with S, and every last one of them wants you to not be alive. The spelunker of Spelunky though, let's just call him Ian for argument's sake, has to descend ever deeper into a set of caves, get a bunch of diamonds and golden statues, and somehow escape alive. And if you manage to fight the swelling desire to see if you can make a clearly impossible jump or survive a pit of snakes with barely any weaponry, you might explore the current level long enough to be punished by an unstoppable ghost that only appears if you've taken too long on a level, often to investigate every nook and cranny for valuables. So once this event is triggered, Ian's only hope is to dash towards the exit, often making hasty mistakes in the process in order to survive. Number 6. Blasto, do not press. Those of us who grew up with earlier generations of video gaming may recall a far simpler type of gameplay. That being, collect all the things, get to the flag, shoot all the flying red pixels. You know the kind I'm talking about. Levels themselves weren't so much levels as they were canvases that you could project your own imagination onto, and when your characters, bullets, and level geometry all looked like big identical green boxes, you kinda had to. As games progressed into 3D though, we still had a similar issue. Sure, you could explore levels in a new dimension, but the levels themselves were still sparse, often completely untextured spaces with the odd obstacle thrown in. This meant that objects in those worlds stood out like a sore thumb, such as the huge scant space in Blasto with a huge button in the center of it. And we all know the temptation of a button in a game like this, but if you should press it here, all of your controls will suddenly invert. And given that Blasto is already an unforgivingly tricky game to begin with, well, good luck with that. Number 5, Dark Souls. Some treasure chests will absolutely obliterate you. In video games, a chest almost always means a cash reward, a new suspiciously useful item, or a delightful meal that you can chow down on for extra buffs. That is, of course, with the exception of Dark Souls. See, Dark Souls revels in its killing of players, and because there are no shortage of ways to be slaughtered in the series, naturally players are always going to be on high alert. However, much like the Resident Evil save music stirs a Pavlovian response inside you telling you that you can finally relax, seeing a treasure chest always drops your guard and you inevitably scuttle towards your payday like a kid towards an ice cream van. So in Dark Souls, you do this very same motion, you pry it open, but instead of getting a hookshot or $5,000, you get, well, dead. You just get dead. And that's because it's not a chest, but actually a monster, a mimic to be precise, and it loves curious, greedy little players who last saved the game 40 minutes ago. Number 4, Silent Hill 4 The Room, leave the doll alone. It seems that there's a theme to most of the entries on this list. Usually it's a button you can't resist pressing, a room you can't resist entering, or an item you can't resist taking or interacting with. And the entry for Silent Hill 4 The Room is no different. Sitting on a dilapidated metal staircase coated in rust and full of melancholy, a character called Walter Sullivan at one point hands the player, Henry, a shabby doll, one of his sole possessions. Now, disorientated by the fact that, as the player, you've just been sucked through a hole in your apartment wall and are now being assailed by floating murder ghosts, this act of kindness is a rarity, and so you're probably going to embrace it. However, take the doll back home to your apartment, and before long, your living room will be haunted by numerous hidden baby faces piercing through the wallpaper, surrounding the doll and, well, just doing nothing positive for the overall decor. Unfortunately, as Henry can't just whack a poster over the top and pretend it doesn't exist like a bad landlord trying to hide some mold, he has to either exorcise the demons or just sit and regret why it felt like it was a good idea to take toys off a stranger in a hell dimension. Number 3, Overwatch, any attempt to experiment with characters. When Overwatch was first released back in 2016, the idea of the hero shooter had kinda reached maximum popularity, and yet this game stood head and shoulders above the rest, due to the sheer quality of its presentation and the sheer cultural phenomenon that it became. With a mechanically diverse cast of characters and 4 distinct classes, those being support, tank, defense, and offense, players got to experience that one-time only joy of cycling through every hero, discovering their unique abilities, and deciding on which one suited their playstyle. And yet, as the game progressed, that cast appeared to shrink as the community got progressively less tolerant of particular character picks. See, if players were new to the game during this period of a settled meta, they'd miss out on getting to try out all of the characters as they were shepherded towards choosing the meta-only picks, something totally contrary to the spirit of the game. Arguably, Activision Blizzard have continued this limitation themselves with Overwatch 2, locking original characters behind first-time familiarization periods and new characters behind battle passes. So whereas before, curiosity was limited only by toxic teammates, now it's locked behind a paywall. Number 2, EVE Online, play perfectly or lose everything. The ignorant of us will walk into EVE Online thinking it'll be the spaceship RPG of their dreams. After all, EVE is super complex and allows for some unique career choices, but it also quickly spirals out of control, and soon you'll have like 3 Microsoft Excel spreadsheets open just to keep track of everything you're doing. Whether you're playing as a cop or as a smuggler or even just a transport ship, be prepared to invest a lot of time into the game. And that's because this is not No Man's Sky, Chorus, or even Elite Dangerous. Everything you do in EVE Online must be carefully considered, to a degree where you might consider it more akin to a micromanagement sim mixed with chess than a simple space exploration game. If you do decide that you want to take your maiden voyage off to a planet far, far away, for instance, you will almost certainly die from pirates flying into controlled space, so shot down by police or vigilantes, or just basic resource depletion. Everything that looks even remotely interesting in this game is likely heavily regulated by in-game laws, or wants to explode you into a million pieces. Number 1, Dead Rising, time is against you. Perhaps one of the Xbox 360's finest and most impressive titles, Dead Rising was the Dawn of the Dead game that we didn't know we needed. Playing as Frank West, players are trapped inside a shopping mall during a zombie invasion and must survive 3 increasingly in-game dangerous days as the situation gets more and more dire. What's particularly novel is that the player themselves is free to do as they please within this time limit. So can choose to spend their finite time saving survivors, finding the real scoop, or even just shooting zombies with Nerf darts for 3 days straight, stopping only to chug down several liters of orange juice. However, with a ticking clock and such a wealth of options, players might find themselves curious enough to diverge from their plan of action and get dragged, for instance, into a park bench duel with a cult leader in the mall cinema. What this inevitably means is overly curious players will lose track of time and miss out on some elapsed content. But that's also precisely why the temptation to explore is so irresistible. Later games sadly axe the timer entirely, and with it any real sense of urgency and objective management, which effectively just turned Dead Rising into Dynasty Warriors with zombies. So that's our list, and want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. What do you think about the tricks these games played on players, and are there any interesting ones I missed off? Let me know, and while you're down there, could you please also give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.